What is the most horrifying piece of information you have to share? Story 1. For a lot of people, the first sign of cardiovascular disease is sudden death. Story 2. Sometimes when an elderly person falls and ends up with a broken hip, it's actually the hip breaking that causes the fall. Story 3. During the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, the flight data shows that the astronauts turned on their internal oxygen supplies after the explosion. So it's likely that some of them were still alive when they hit the water. Story 4. Carbon dioxide was blamed for the deaths of around 1,700 people in Cameroon, West Africa in 1986, when a massive release of gas occurred from Lake Nyos, a volcanic crater lake. The clinical findings in 845 survivors seen at or admitted to hospital were compatible with exposure to an asphyxiant gas. They were just sleeping when the lake released a giant cloud of CO2 and wiped out almost an entire village. Story 5. That the leading cause of death for a pregnant woman is murder. Story 6. There are orphanages full of kids who will never be adopted, and many might not live long enough to graduate from the facility. The reason is that these are kids rescued from or abandoned by the child sex trade. They have an eclectic selection of STDs. HIV is rife, and most have major emotional, psychological issues from the abuse they suffered. Story 7. On February 3, 1998, 20 people died when a cable car situated near the ski resort town of Cavallese, Italy, plummeted to the ground from 260 feet. It was caused when a United States Marine Corps EA-6B Prowler aircraft, which was flying excessively fast and too low during a low-altitude training mission, ultimately severed the cable that supported the cable car as it was descending from Mount Cermis. The disaster has been named the Strage del Cermis, Massacre of Kermis, in Italy. The pilot, Captain Richard J. Ashby, and his navigator, Captain Joseph Schweitzer, were ultimately deemed not guilty of involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide for their roles in the disaster. However, they were found guilty of obstruction of justice and conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman upon being found to have destroyed camcorder footage recorded from the plane's cockpit. Story 8. The American blood supply runs on about a 2 to 3 day buffer for most products. If for some reason the entire system shut down for a couple of weeks, people would die for lack of transfusions. And while at least 60% of our citizens are eligible to donate blood, only 5% of those people ever will. If that number went to around 8%, no blood bank would ever need to call you again. Story 9. During time working at Pearl Harbor National Memorial, I came across 2 horrifying tidbits. When the USS Oklahoma rolled over, it trapped sailors inside with no way of rescuing them. Cutting through the hull was impossible. A single gap would have caused the air pocket to collapse and flood the compartment. The workers still heard banging on the hull during Christmas, nearly 3 weeks after the attack, and plugged their ears with cotton to drown it out. The second tidbit is that by the time the workers got the ship upright and drained, workers were only collecting bits and pieces of remains. When caskets of the unknown sailors were exhumed to begin DNA identification, they discovered over 100 different strands of DNA from a single coffin. Story 10. Supposedly global warming will cause spiders to slowly get bigger over time. Story 11. L'Angolo dei Gigi, the iconic Italian restaurant run by chef Gigi Ferruso, left an indelible mark on the culinary scene in the capital of Colombia in the 80s, not only for its exquisite flavors, but also for the dark rumors that surrounded it. It was said that the gourmet dishes served there, located on the road to La Calera, were prepared with human flesh. Little is known about Ferruso because it's known that he was a butcher from a young age and emigrated from Italy to settle in Colombia. Over time, he began associating with influential politicians in the country, and his behavior changed so much that many compared him to a mobster. Rumors spread that these politicians were not only his friends, but also the ones supplying the bodies he allegedly used in his cooking, because a supposed former member of the secret police claimed that the bodies from the wars against guerrillas and drug trafficking were sold to Ferruso, and that, on the day of the Palace of Justice siege, he was allowed to select the plumpest corpses. To this day, the whereabouts of these people are unknown, and that is why one of the theories is that he cooked them and fed them to his diners. The situation worsened when restaurant employees began to suspect something was wrong, as Ferruso wouldn't allow anyone else to handle the meat because he claimed it was imported from Italy, sent by his sister, although she later denied this. Eventually, after these rumors circulated, L'Angolo dei Gigi closed its doors, and Ferruso disappeared over 40 years ago, leaving his fate shrouded in mystery. No one knows what happened to him. Story 12. You are currently covered in millions upon billions of tiny little life forms, most of which are required for your continued existence. You are the entire universe to a litany of microscopic beings. Story 13. I'm a vet, and I would say the most horrifying thing I have to tell people is that I can't do anything for their animal. It feels horrible every single time I have to discuss palliative care or talk about it perhaps being time for their animal. Story 14. Gaze detection. The human brain seems to be able to sense if someone is staring at us, even if we do not see the person at all. This ability has probably protected us from predators. So, if you have sometimes felt that someone was staring at you, chances are someone really was. Story 15. When I was in Miami from 2011 to 2018, there was a middle-aged man who was constantly crying and complaining about how he missed his dogs. He annoyed the wrong people about it, and they pinned him down and sawed his fingers off so that he couldn't pet his dogs when he got out. Truly some horrific stuff, but some people don't give a fuck about others. Story 16. Spiders have exoskeletons that they shed. When you see a dead spider, it might not be a dead spider. It could just be its old skin and the spider is now somewhere else and bigger. Story 17. Prions, a misfolded protein in the brain that causes other proteins to misfold. This literally causes sponge brain, or large holes in the brain. It is always fatal, and there is no known cure or treatment to slow the progression. Prion disease can be contagious or genetic. The contagious form cannot be killed by extreme heat, meaning that people with prion disease who have to have surgery, those instruments used during surgery cannot be sterilized. The most prevalent contagious form of prion disease is bovine spongiform encephalopathy, aka mad cow disease. Chronic wasting disease, CWD, is another common form of prion disease, which mostly affects deer. While there are no human cases of CWD, it is theorized that the disease could be capable of infecting humans. Prion disease can also be sporadic, meaning the cause is not genetic or contagious, ultimately unknown. The most common form of prion disease, CJD, is mostly sporadic. Prion disease can lay dormant in the body for years, but once it is activated, the average prognosis is about 1 year. Story 18. Once you begin to show signs of rabies, it's already too late to do anything about it. You have an inevitable and terrifying death ahead of you. Also, it's possible to get rabies from even a tiny, unnoticeable scratch, possibly while you're sleeping. If you've been camping in the last couple months, you could have it right now and not even know it. Story 19. On November 25, 1988, a Japanese high school girl named Yumiko Furuta was threatened and brought to the house of a teenager who, along with his friends, proceeded to torture and rape the girl countless times for 44 days straight. In the end, Furuta was severely malnourished and was left in an incredibly weakened mental and physical state. On January 4, 1988, she was killed after being beaten up and having her face burned by the group of boys. Less than 24 hours after her death, her body was wrapped in a blanket, placed in a travel bag, put inside a metal drum which was filled with wet cement, and dumped in a construction site in Tokyo. Story 20. I lost my leg to a bug bite that I had no knowledge of getting. One day my ankle swelled up and I thought it was just me getting old. It got progressively worse. This was during COVID, so I didn't have a lot of options. After being up for a few days from pain and running a fever, I went to the emergency room and was diagnosed as having a sprained ankle. They gave me pain medication which helped me sleep. I woke up after 18 hours to blisters under my ace bandage. I don't have any memory of anything until I woke up after my third surgery of them removing more and more of my leg. It was necrotizing fasciitis. I lost everything from a medical misdiagnosis. I am currently just about starving to death as disability doesn't pay enough, even though I worked my whole life and did everything I was supposed to. Story 21. More than 1 in 10 women will experience sexual assault at some point in their lives. And 1 in 5 women in the United States have experienced completed or attempted rape during their lifetime. Story 22. The slightly fishy smell from the genitals of a healthy, intact male is from the pre-ejaculatory fluid produced by the Cowper's gland, not precum. That is a different fluid, and some people don't find it erotic. Story 23. The adoption industry, especially infant adoption, is actually human trafficking, and sometimes genocide, dressed up in a social justice trench coat. It's actually a multi-billion-dollar industry that quite literally profits off selling children. Adoption has a long history of being used as a tool of genocide and colonization, especially for Native communities. It disconnects a person from their culture and community, which was what was done to me. Even foster care is highly questionable. It emerged around the same time that enslavement was ended and was utilized as a way for farmers to get free labor. Nowadays, states steal money from foster children and roughly 90% of them will be abused within the system. Most children who are in foster care have some family who want them home. Neglect is often a code word for poverty. My own adoptive parents thought they were saving a baby, but my adoption never should have been legal, and according to the UN, it was an act of genocide. My adoption paperwork was edited because I was worth more money without my heritage. I am white presenting. White infants can be worth up to $60,000. The prices are based on ability and race. Adoptees are overrepresented within all psychiatric settings, like inpatient and outpatient facilities, rehabs, the troubled teen industry, and psychiatric emergency rooms, which in the US generates even more money. We are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than the general public. We are also overrepresented within the prison system, again generates more money in the US, and among serial killers. Story 24. If you have elderly people in your life and they have their first fall, it really is the signal to the end. Once you start falling, your quality of life is going to go down quickly. Sure, I had a grandpa that fell at 85 and didn't pass until 89, but every single elderly person who falls really is on a ticking clock. Story 25. Our wealth is being stolen from us at an ever-increasing rate by privately owned central banks. Wealth inequality is growing exponentially. The fact that every new dollar created is created as the product of debt simply means that we cannot print our way out of this disaster. The only way to balance the books is with a period of severe deflationary pain. What's more alarming is that some people speculate that it's kind of orchestrated. Story 26. Our world as we know it can be instantly eviscerated by quasar. A dying sun's last hurrah, pretty much. It sends big-ass laser beams out into their surroundings, and as you could think, those beams have the power of the sun in them, and we can't see them coming. Story 27. The history of gynecology and the father of it is quite horrific to learn about. He essentially experimented on slaves without any form of anesthesia. Story 28. Considering how many wars there have been in just over a century, and the number of unstable and hostile nations in possession of nukes at the ready for just one of them to have a particularly bad day, the likelihood of mankind existing more than another 50 years looks exceedingly grim. That being said, there is way too much time wasted on grudges, arguments, and worrying about your calorie intake. Be kind and seek common ground and compassion for one another. Have that cheesecake. Stop doom scrolling and get out and ride motorcycles, go skydiving, or whatever sounds fun to you. Ignore all the hate and judgmental BS everywhere. Yesterday, I was 25 and full of life. Now I'm 55 and full of regret for countless things. With my health, I may not see 60. I'm going to make the most of what I have left. Story 29. Another one related to climate change. There are vast quantities of methane trapped in the Siberian permafrost that will cause a chain reaction if released. It is estimated to raise the temperature by several hundred, if I remember correctly, degrees if that happens, and we do not know how far away we are from triggering it. It could be just a degree or two more. Story 30. The next supervirus or bacteria could very well be emerging at this very moment in a random animal, or even just buried in glaciers, and this one could wipe us out.